I'm Trevor Sysock. I'm the Director of MDM and Automation at Second Sun Consulting, where I've been for 11 years, just about. I'm also the author of some open source tools, Renew and Baseline, and I'm a contributor to Installomator, which is one of our topics today. So I have this talk basically split up into 4 sections, a little intro overview of both things, a dive into Installomator and what it is and how to use it, a dive into swiftDialog, what that is and how to use it, and then some ways to smash those things together. I have put a Q&A slide between right after each of those dives in case you have questions about those specific tools. And there is workable code that we're going to go over in the 4th section, and all of that's available on GitHub as templates and example scripts for you at the end there. So both of these tools, just to start out, are completely MDM management tool agnostic. They work on macOS fundamentals. There's no specific need to use any one management tool. There's all kinds of ways to deploy them, so you can pretty much bend any of the major or minor MDMs to your will to use these products, right? These are building blocks for larger workflows. They're not any complete product in itself necessarily, although you'll see Installomator is pretty simple to run to install applications, but they are kind of fundamentally, they're building blocks that you'll put together to make larger projects or slot into your existing management workflows as needed. So because of that, talking about specific details on how you might deploy or use in your organization can get complex quickly. And that's not really the focus of this talk. Focus is more to give you the ideas of how you can, the fundamentals of using the tools so that you can think about how you might slot them into your organization. If you have questions or issues or anything like that, there are thousands of people, many of them smarter than me, on the Mac Admin Slack, always willing to help out and get you through whatever questions you might have there. So why would you choose Installomator over any of the other available automation, patching, application, installation things? And I'm sorry, I know I'm very tall and this room was not designed for me specifically. So using Installomator to deploy your applications or update them requires no infrastructure. There's no S3 buckets. There's no on-prem servers you need to maintain or anything like that. You will also not be beholden to any specific vendor. You won't get locked into a specific management tool. If anyone's had to do an MDM migration ever, they're not super easy going, right? And if you are using the built-in tools for any one MDM vendor for all of your workflows and everything you do, then when the money people come and tell you that tool's way too expensive now and you're going to have to go use insert other vendor here, you'll have less work to do if you're using some of these open source tools that get you around that. So with Installomator, you can install or update an application with a single line of code like this. The Installomator script lives on your computer. You tell it which app you want to install. You can add additional options, but at the core of it, running this on a Mac with Installomator on it will either install or update support app, for example. And if there's no update needed, it will just exit quietly and do nothing. So swiftDialog, some reasons you might find yourself wanting to learn how this tool works, right? Branded, consistent messaging, beautiful macOS native looking dialogues and notification center events and stuff like that. And again, full control over your workflows and how things look and not beholden to your MDM. So that last one is big for us. We're an MSP, but I'm also a consultant. I work with outside IT departments or other companies that have internal IT, and we use their tooling. And I know that when I build something for one client or one environment, much of that can easily be ported somewhere else, whether they're using Adigy, Jamf, Intune, whatever. Transparency, keep your users informed of what you're doing. Personally, I appreciate the guidance that Apple kind of pushes towards us where, yes, you can do these things on the workstation, but your users are gonna know what you're doing, right? So swiftDialog is a great way of letting your users know what's going on, what you're installing, what you're doing, even if it's not something that they can opt out of. Compliance, encouraging your users to do things, right? Or forcing your users to do things. swiftDialog can be a big blurred screen preventing any other work from going on. It can pop up on top of all your other applications, stuff like that. If you really need to get your users' attention, I would be careful in how you deploy those sorts of things. One of the tools I mentioned at the top was Renew. Second Sun has released that as a free open source tool. It only uses swiftDialog and a script, and it's works similar to Nudge. I kind of ripped off the philosophy of how Nudge works, but instead of doing updates, it prompts your users to restart their workstations every so often, depending on how you configure it. If you've ever wondered if one of your coworkers might be a replicant, that guy that sits in the closet just writing code all day, you can pepper them with ethical questions in the hope that they might have a brain meltdown. Is another great thing. So if you want to deploy and update your apps quickly, easily, with minimal, no overhead, and keep your users informed of what's going on as you do it, you're in the right place, and we're going to talk about that now. So Installomator is a macOS installer super tool. These handsome gentlemen on the screen right here are the authors and maintainers of the project. I just came on this year, and primarily I'm trying to go through the backlog of community submissions and pull requests to add or change labels to the project, which leads me to this part, which is Installomator is very much a community tool. As you'll see here, there's 800 applications now in the library, and there's no way any one or five of us could maintain those, right? It's also got a lot of the major applications your users want and what you're probably used to putting in self-service anyhow. But it is community supported. We accept submissions for new applications to the library and fixes and stuff like that. So Installomator is definitely not right for every organization. You will need to be okay with latest is greatest philosophy in terms of third-party applications. You might want the low maintenance overhead, again, no management infrastructure, a mobile fleet, people working from home so they don't have an on-prem server to access, or you want to provide them user-initiated installs through self-service. If that doesn't describe your organization, you may fall into this category. So if you need version control and a tightly required test and approval process before new versions of applications are released, there are other open source community tools that are much more appropriate for that kind of environment, right? And those are fantastic as well. So Installomator started out, I believe the first release was around 2020. And basically in the 2010s, a lot of the pillars of the Mac admins community started sharing scripts to do essentially the same thing for different products, right? I want to download the latest version of something. I want to verify that's the right thing that I got. I want to install it, and I want to delete it. And prior to having something like Installomator, you may have had 10, 20, 25 management scripts that you were or were not maintaining, and it could be a problem. And most of those also probably were not very secure or doing the kinds of validations that you really need, the thought you need to put into it. So one brave man, Armin Briegel, decided, I'm doing this over and over and it's not getting maintained. Can't I just do these steps in one place and maintain this one script and go from there? You might be starting to recognize a theme on the memes there. So the key uses and features of Installomator, using for initial deployment of applications, or of a workstation even, self-service use cases, and application patching. Find what's on the machine and update it if it's there. Sometimes. So Installomator does not always efficiently update applications. You'll have to look at the recipe and see if the right pieces are there. We're going to talk about that more in just a minute. And sometimes there are just better ways to accomplish application updates than scripted installs, right? So if the vendor provides an auto update service that can be managed, that will run autonomously without admin credentials and all that, that is probably a better choice than Installomator or any kind of scripted updates, at least for the front line, right? Scripted updates would help in case those tools start failing, not working as expected. These three are good examples of this. Each of these could be, their built-in automated updaters can be managed by an MDM configuration profile. Installomator is one very big shell script, but it can be broken up into two components. The first is the core script that does the work. It's about 1,200 lines of code. Once you remove all the comments, remove all the labels, the recipes, and empty lines and stuff like that. It is very well commented. It is not too difficult to go through and see each step and validate it's doing what the authors claim that it's doing. So this core script is the downloader, the validator, and it controls the interactions with the end user, sometimes depending on circumstances and depending on which options you provide at runtime. It can handle all kinds of ways that application vendors decide to give you their app. So if you've got where is it? If you've got an app that's in a DMG, that's in a zip, it can even do that. They exist. You know they do. So the second part of the script are the labels. These are fragments of a shell script that provide instructions to Installomator on how to install any individual application. So there are 4 required elements of a label. The first is the name, just what is the software called? It's usually just the name in the applications folder. The type, is it a package? Is it one of those wild other ways that vendors decide to give us stuff? The download URL, where are we going to find it? What host do you want to actually get the software from? And then the expected team identifier. And I'll talk about that a little bit more, but basically it's who signed it and was it signed by the actual people that make the software, not just some other random developer. The last component I'm going to talk about in depth is not required. It is an optional one, but it's app new version. And so this will be a string of code that finds what is the latest available version from the vendor of the software. And I'm going to go into that more right now using the Zoom label as an example, not because I love their software in any way, but because it's just a really good example for the purposes of this talk, right? So it is a package type installer, which is nice of them. Their expected team ID is published on their website, but if you could go and download the software and look at it to get that expected team identifier. Zoom gives us a static download URL. So this is one URL, it never changes, and it always forwards to whatever the latest package is that they're offering. And the last part I want to talk about is the app new version. And you'll see right away this looks different than the others. All the other parts of the label were static code. You're just setting the variables. In this case, we actually have to run some commands. And this talk is going to get a little bit scripty. I'm trying to build it up, and we're going to go over some of the fundamentals here of just how you can see what's going on and how these commands are built. So in shell scripting, if you have a variable equals, and then you see the $ parentheses, that means that that variable is going to be set to the value, the final output of whatever command comes between those parentheses, okay? In this case, we're also using what are called pipes. A pipe takes one command and takes the output of that command and passes it to the next one in the chain. So whatever the results are of this first command, send them over to the second one. In this case, we're going to use curl, which is a downloader tool. We're not actually downloading files with this, though. And we're taking the results of that download and sending it to grep, which is like a text search tool. And I'm going to go over that right now. So curl is a downloader. You can use it to actually download files, right? But in this case, we're asking just for the headers. We're asking for the metadata of the web page that we're providing it, not the actual content of the web page we're providing it. And the L option right there is for location. I mentioned that we're following redirects. The L basically says, I want the I and L together says, I want the metadata of the final destination of this URL. And the results of this command look something like this, with a whole bunch of other stuff below it as well. But what we are interested here is the location. So that is the final URL after following all of those forwards. So at this point in the command with the curl, we just have this, we have the word location and this nicely usable URL, which we pass over to grep to, I'm sorry, we had that whole big block of text at that point. We pass it to grep and we tell grep, I only want the line that starts with the word location. So now, once we get to this point in the command, we have this string of text. And the next thing we do is use cut to chop it up. So you'll notice we have a D flag, which is the delimiter. And we're basically telling the shell to chop up this string of text using the / as a delimiter. And you'll notice we have 6 text fields if you do that. And we're interested in field 5. So that is the end of the command. And once all that runs, which happens in a fraction of a second compared to how long it took me to talk about it, we end up with the variable equaling this value, which at the time I put this together was the full string of the latest available version of Zoom. This is what the output of an Installomator run looks like with no debug enabled, no extra logging or anything like that. You'll see we're just running the Installomator script, and the name of the label we want to run starts out with some metadata about Installomator itself and what label we're running. It goes on to describe any of the options that we've set get processed. In this case, we didn't set any options, so this is processing all the default options that come with an Installomator run. And then this may look like errors, but what's happening here, this is a fresh deployment. This is looking for Zoom on the computer before it runs the update or the install, and it couldn't find it. So that's what the errors you're seeing did not find Zoom installed previously, and the app version is blank because it didn't see it on the disk. And you see the latest version is up there showing us what it calculated using the code we already went over. Here it is actually doing the work. It's doing the download. It's doing the install. It is validating. You can see that the team ID of the actual download matches the team ID in the label, the expected one. And so it installs the package. And this is just telling you finishing up. We found the app after it was installed, checks to see what version was actually installed and tells you, because with, if a vendor changes something about that whole string of code we looked at earlier, then you can get caught in a weird situation where the Installomator thinks the latest version is not actually what the latest version is. right? So it tells you and validates that everything happened as expected, and it gives you an exit code. 0 means good, and it does have a wide variety of exit codes for any failure condition that might have happened. You can use those exit codes. I mentioned that Installomator is a building block. If you're building larger scripts, you can use the exit code of Installomator to feed additional logic in your script. You know, if I failed to install Zoom, what do I do? Sort of thing. To get Installomator itself, there's a package on the releases page of the GitHub, and that package will give you the latest approved labels as of the time of that release. The main branch on GitHub, which is the default one you'll get to if you just go to the repository, has a newer version of Installomator with any labels that have been accepted, approved into the project since that last package release. And so you might want to look at those dates and see, to determine what you want to do, if you want to use the package or if you need to repackage it yourself or rebuild it yourself. The GitHub repository has tools already created for you to assemble your own version of Installomator, including a package. So if you don't like the idea of giving your computers 800 recipes to install all of that software, you only want to give these specific 10 and then maybe 2 more you built yourself that are only for internal use, you can use the assemble script to build your own Installomator script and distribute that to your workstations. So with most management tools, you will want to deploy the Installomator script itself to the workstation so that it's there ahead of time, ready for use. If you are a Jamf admin, you have the benefit of keeping the script up in Jamf and then creating policies with script parameters that tell Installomator what to do. So that's pretty nice for Jamf users. Everybody else, this is an example of using it in Mosel to deploy Nudge Suite silently. And if your machines have Installomator on it, this is all you need to do a silent install of that software or update. So at runtime, we have the ability to add additional options, which you just saw with the Nudge Suite. They're going to describe how Installomator behaves and what the end user experience is. Do you want to notify your users? Do you want it to be silent? What do you want to do if there's an App Store version already installed of BBEdit? Do you want to overwrite it? Do you want to just let that App Store version live? A bunch of more options I'm not going to go into in detail. The other thing you can do at runtime is override any individual element of a label recipe. So if a vendor changes the URL on you and you can't wait for the 5 of us to go and fix it or whatever, you can, without changing the Installomator script on the machines, you can go and pass a new option and say, no, the download URL is here now, and it will fix those broken labels. If you want to use it to pin an old version of software, like swiftDialog, for instance, doesn't run on macOS 11 anymore, but there is an old version that does. So you could tell Installomator if the machine's on 11, you would build this logic yourself. You would say, if this is running macOS 11, go get this old version that's good. If you want to test the new beta release of Nudge and help Eric out, you could use this feature to point to the beta release of Nudge as well, and stuff like that. So we are downloading code, applications, packages from the internet and running them. So obviously, if you're alive and breathing, that kind of scares you a little bit. So let's talk about the security and verification validation. Installomator uses built-in macOS security tools to verify that applications are signed and also signed by the developer that we expect. So, it costs $100 to get a developer certificate. Any one of those folks could go make a package called Microsoft Office and sign it, and now it's a signed package that's called Microsoft Office. Your user might find that. Installomator protects against that. We also check for notarization. Any developer can submit their applications or packages to Apple get that package notarized, staple a ticket to it, and your device will say, Apple scanned this, this is good. And Apple can also revoke that notarization later on. So if a problem is found, that notarization will fail, and Installomator will not install that app or package. So these are basic gatekeeper protections you might be managing with your MDM profile, and you're like, well, why would I use this? Users can go get their own thing. I'm already using gatekeeper, but Installomator does add these two extra protections of making sure it is signed by the expected team ID and that it came from the web server that you want it to come from. They're not going to SourceForge or something like that and downloading Office. That is my initial dive into Installomator tool itself. Are there any questions before I go on to swiftDialog? Yeah. Oh, hold on. Help me out. Thanks, Adam.
Is this usable in a student lab situation?
A student lab situation? I don't see why not. What you want students to be able to install their own software somehow?
No. Like say I set a trigger or something and
oh, absolutely.
the thing checks and then automatically gets the latest.
Yep. So you build the logic that you want into your management scripts, right? So you can do a check, is Chrome installed or not? If it's already installed, move on to the next step. If it's not installed, run Installomator to grab it, right? It'll work at the login screen. It won't work at File Vault, obviously, but it'll work even if you're at the login screen. It does not require an end user to be logged in at the time that you run it.
Very nice.
Anything else?
I'm a bit of a Jamf Pro newbie. My question is, you mentioned that Installomator can be installed in like the Jamf server. Is that feature limited to on-prem Jamf installations or Jamf Cloud as well?
Jamf Cloud as well. So you create a new script in the script section of Jamf, and that lives there. And then you would create individual policies and put that script as an element of that policy. And when you do that, you can add whichever parameters you want there. So you would have a policy for each, in this, to make the building blocks of Jamf policies, you would have a policy for each application that you want to install. Installomator does one at a time, right? So you can run it back to back, but it does one at a time. So you would create your policy that way, and then you could make another overarching policy that calls those child policies one by one to get a full flow.
Cool. Okay.
We're going to take someone out. This is great. I saw a note in there when you were going through some of the text from the Zoom example that it was citing blocked processes. So I'm assuming that one of the built-in labels or something in the labels we can say is like pgrep for this. If it's running, chill out.
Exactly, yes.
Wait till a better time.
The label definition, the label recipe includes blocked processes you can define. By default, it just uses the app name. Most apps just use their own name, but some apps have multiple processes and stuff like that. So if Installomator sees that the application is already running, it's going to do whatever you've told it to do. By default, I think it prompts the user asking them to quit or the user will get a prompt. That prompt is currently still AppleScript, hasn't been moved to swiftDialog yet, which is on my long to-do list to help get rolled out. But if it recognizes that Zoom or whatever is already running, it's going to pop up and ask the user if they want to close Zoom or if they want to quit Installomator from doing its thing. And you can also define at runtime to say, no, do other things like ignore it, kill it, prompt them, but also kill it, right? Tell the user you're going to do it. There's a few different options there.
Nice. Also another quickie.
Or do nothing, right? You can just say exit silently, like don't do anything if the application's running.
Nice. And Execution cadence, totally defined by us. There's no daemon included with this, so it's just whatever
No,
our MDM does.
and that
or
was
we
on my
build the
speaker
logic.
notes for the package slide. The Installomator package, all it does is place the script on your computer. It does not install any launch agents, daemons. You don't need any privacy permission controls, anything like that. It is really just kind of a standalone thing. That installer package does nothing but put the script in the expected place. Great question, thank you. Yeah, more?
Taking Zoom as the example, how do I pass the Zoom package installation parameters into Installomator? For example, I want to maybe disable the auto update. I may want to disable the Google single sign-on domain or add my single sign-on domain into installation process.
I don't believe it's possible to pass additional options to the installer package itself with Installomator. I would have to look. That's not something I really seek or have to do with any tools. Both of those tools you mentioned would be much better managed by a configuration profile than trying to set a certain value at installation time, right? So we do similar things, but we manage them with a profile. And with Zoom specifically, as long as you're using the Zoom installer for IT package, it will respect the configuration that's in place.
I see. Second question, for certain software, do you check dependencies of this package on others?
No, so that would be done in your script. Again, building blocks, right? That would be if you have that need for your environment, you would build the logic of when and how to install Zoom into your management script. Installomator will do the dirty work for you when you tell it to do it.
Okay, thank you.
So is it possible to use Installomator in a fashion where like I download the DMG or package file separately from Installomator, but then feed that to Installomator to do the actual installation work?
It's a good question. I don't think Installomator supports that. I think you would have to put it on a web server if it's a local web server or something like that. Yeah. You should ask that in the Installomator channel, though, and maybe someone who knows better.
You actually can. You have to change the source for Installomator to the local directory.
It'll take a
and
local file?
It'll take a local file.
Look at me learning stuff. Awesome. Thank you. So then you could do that with an override, like I mentioned, too. In that case, you wouldn't have to edit the script if you didn't want to, I guess.
This is me being a little bit greedy, since I do both Mac and PC. Do you or anyone know of anything similar for the PC side of the equation?
Yeah, chocolatey is the rough equivalent that you'll want to look at. I think I don't think it's as cool as Installomator, but
The name is
I think it does. You know, I went through those first four steps that every installer script does. I think chocolatey does roughly the same on the Windows side. Okay, I do want to move on because, like I said, there's a lot to get through, and we're going to go over swiftDialog and how you can slot that into your environment. So swiftDialog is brought to us primarily by the amazing, inimitable Bart Reardon. Bart works for the CSIRO, which is an Australian government agency responsible for scientific research, I think, right? Yes? Okay, excellent. Roughly JPL for Australia, JPL NASA for Australia. This guy's awesome. He's very active on Slack. He is very helpful, and wish he was here this week, but I guess he went to the other conference this summer. So 3 primary use cases for swiftDialog would be giving native macOS notification center events with your branding and messaging, exactly how you want it to show up. Prompting your users and asking them for information, and then taking that information and using it to feed logic of the rest of your management scripts. Hey, do you want to do this right now? Which applications do you want me to install? Stuff like that. You can parse the output of that window and get real fancy. Like, this is a very big one that's not actually real or used in production. I just made it for this. And then once you gather that information, you can notify them of ongoing processes as it is, verified, uploaded, and responded to, whatever that means. Like I said, this is all just example stuff right here. This is the primary focus of our talk today, is notifying users of what's going on, right? Smashing together with Installomator. But in order to get to this point where we can understand that stuff, we have to go over the fundamentals of how the tool works. If you want to use notification center events, you have two kind of prerequisites you might want to take care of. Customizing the app icon is done in a really clever way. You don't have to repackage or anything like that. I'm not covering that part in this talk. The wiki goes into detail on how to do it, but it's really nifty and not too difficult to take care of. And if you want your users to see your notifications, you need to configure those notification settings with a profile. And then other than that, you just need to deploy the package. And quick show of hands, does anyone know of a tool I might use to deploy the, yeah, okay. So swiftDialog also, I split up into two primary components to talk about. So the first one is the application bundle. It is a full Swift native macOS app. It doesn't live in the normal place. It lives in application support folder. And you typically don't do anything with that in your scripting or anything else. You do a little bit in that folder just to customize the icon, and that's it. The other part is the binary, which is actually just a shell script that handles some fundamentals about running management tools and then having GUI applications running in the user space. You don't want to run like GUI windows, GUI elements as root. You want to run them as the logged in user. Again, Bart has done amazing work on this little shell script shim that does all that thinking for you. So you don't have to take that into consideration at all. This is us building our first dialog window. I'm trying to figure out how much of this I'm blocking, sorry. Right here, we've given the dialog command, and then we've customized the title, and we've customized the message, and this is what we get when we run this command. You'll see this is on multiple lines. There's a backslash at the end of every line. That is a shell scripting convention. You can get shell commands getting, as long as my arm span, and they're impossible to read. I also couldn't fit them on a keynote slide, but that backslash before a carriage return means you can put things on multiple lines and make it readable and accessible to other people looking at your script. So next, I've given it an icon that I want it to use and given it a path to a local file. And so swiftDialog will use that in its icon area. I've told it I want 2 buttons and I want them to say these things. Those buttons, when clicked, provide you exit codes so that you can use that exit code in a management script to change your logic depending on whether a user clicked button 1, button 2, or there's a button 3 as well. And last, I've done on top and movable. Those are kind of self-explanatory, but I put them in just about every dialog window if you do have to pop one to your users, so they can move things out of the way, so it doesn't get stuck behind Microsoft Word or Chrome or whatever, because if you're running this from a management tool and you allow the swiftDialog window just to go behind the user's stuff, and you haven't done extra logic or set a timer on it or anything like that, if it's your Jamf binary or the Mosel binary that's running that dialog and it's just forgotten in the background, it's probably your management tool's probably not doing anything else while the user ignores this and surfs Reddit. And la-di-da, magic finish, adding extra options gets you to this point where you have text boxes and radio buttons and check boxes and all that fancy stuff, and info boxes over here and a third button. When you get to the point you're making something that complicated, you don't necessarily want it to be all done in a shell script. If you're packaging or you have the ability to create a JSON file with the settings that you want swiftDialog to use, you can do that. This is available in the example repository. And that created that previous window you just saw. And when you do that, this becomes your swiftDialog command. which is just really simple. You call Dialog, you tell it I have a JSON file, and it's right there, the path to that file, and it makes that window for you. So that entire exercise was just showing you, okay, how do I make a single static dialog window? We obviously want that window to change and update as things happen as we're moving through our management script. And in order to do that, we use what is called a command file. So I'm going to draw an initial dialog window here before I install some software. This is not an Installomator example here. We're going to say I'm doing the old dirty way of doing it on my own. Yeah, that's you. So we have basically the same options I used before. This time you might notice the icon file is not a local file path. It's pointing to a web server, which swiftDialog is happy to download and display for you if you ask it. I know that I have 4 progress steps that I want to get through in this script. So I'm going to tell swiftDialog I want a progress bar, and I want it to have 4 steps. And I'm using mini mode, which is a way to, it's very cool for self-service workflows. It basically tells swiftDialog, I don't want a whole large window, I just want a little tiny one. And you'll see that in a second. The last really important step here is that ampersand. That is not a swiftDialog thing. This is a shell convention. When you have a shell script, by default, your shell script does the first command, waits until that's done, begins the next command, waits until that's done. But in this case, we want to pop that dialog window open. We don't want to wait for the user to do anything with it. We want to just send it to the background and let it to continue to run while our script processes the next command. And that's what that ampersand does right there. It says, pop this window up, and then forget about it, move on, do the next thing. And as we do that, we end up with a nice little mini mode swiftDialog window that looks something like that. And as we move through our management scripts, which I'm not showing code to download things or anything else, but you can imagine it's getting interspaced between these next few steps here. I need to tell this dialog window, hey, I want you to change the information that's on the screen right now. And we do that by using the echo command, which just prints text. And we have a specially formatted line of text that we're going to print, telling it, I want to update the progress text, which is this element here. And that's the value I want you to update it to. Those double carets are another shell convention. That means don't print this output to my terminal or whatever standard out. Send the output to this specific file here. This is the default command file that any swiftDialog window is actively looking at that file, waiting for you to send instructions to it. And so I'm sending this line of text to the command file, and this dialog window is watching, waiting for those instructions to come in and update its elements based on what you give it. After you send a update to the command file, you want to add a sleep just 1/10 of a second. That's just to give swiftDialog enough time to process that previous command before you send it another command. It really has no perceptible difference to the user, but if you didn't include those, this second instruction might get skipped, and then the third one would go. So you just want to give it a breath, man. Calm down. You can see again, I'm echoing to increment. Instead of progress text this time, I'm affecting the actual progress bar. And I'm saying increment. You might remember I told it 4 steps. So that's essentially sending it to 25% complete when I tell it increment. If you send increment again, it'll go to 50, 75, and then 100. And I keep doing this basically in between the steps where I download the package, verify the package, install the package. I'm sending those updates to the command file so that the user knows what's going on while it happens. And now we're installing, and now we're cleaning up. So I'm done with my script, but that swiftDialog window is still open because I told my script to forget it exists, right? I can send a quit command to that command file, and it closes the open window. You'll notice that was a lot of repeating code, which is error prone and pain in the butt and hard to read. Anytime you're repeating the same code over and over like that in a script, you're going to want to learn how to use a function. So this is how you declare a function with an argument. So I can pass the message I want to send to this function, and it'll send it to the command file for me and then sleep 1 second. And when you actually use a function in a script like this, it ends up looking like this, which is much more clean and nice and easy to read, and you don't have to worry about copy-paste errors or changing something in the function later on. You change in one place. That default Dialog command file can get busy, or there are edge cases you can run into where swiftDialog might get confused or something like that. You can use a path to a custom command file so that you generate a new command file for every time swiftDialog runs. I recommend doing that. Here again, we have a variable that's being set to the output of a command because we have the dollar parentheses. That command is make temp, and we're telling the Mac, make a temporary file right over here. All of those X's are gonna get generated into just some random letters. And so you know you're getting a new file every time you run it. And the make temp file outputs the name of the file it just created as its result. So now I have not only a temporary file that was created, but also the variable contains, the variable is the value that points to that file. Here's that same Dialog command we looked at a minute ago to start installing Mist with one additional option, which is telling swiftDialog use this custom command file instead of the default one. This is going to be important for the Installomator integration later on. So that was a single application, single window. Adam, you want to throw him that thing? The next thing we're going to go over is lists. If you have multiple actions going on at the same time, like the list view we looked at earlier.
So what if something errors out and like you're kind of like doing a progress of like, you know, download, verifying, all that kind of stuff. But if something errors, you're kind of like canceling the whole thing. It's not like a progression. It's like forget this whole thing.
Yeah. So what I do is any script I write, well, any complex script I write has a cleanup and exit function. In that cleanup and exit function, we're telling the Dialog window to quit, and we're deleting that temporary file. And so when you run a command in a shell script, you should always be verifying that it completes successfully, right? And you can do that with if statements and stuff.
But what I mean is, how do I update the dialog to tell the user that it failed and not have it look like it's progressing and like a progress indicator?
Got it.
Basically like overwrite the progress indicator to just be like, you know, red or
Yeah.
errored out or whatever.
So, I mean, practically speaking, there's two ways to do it. You can use that command file to put the progress to complete, maybe put an icon on there with a big red warning sign and a message. You could do that with the command file to affect the already running swiftDialog window.
So I could update the icon midstream.
Yeah, there's a
Okay.
lot of stuff about the window you can update midstream, which is what brings us really powerful. Honestly though, it might be easier in your case that you're saying to just quit that window and make a new one with the content, right?
Okay.
Like, so you could have one failure window that shows up no matter what the failure condition was, define that in one place in your script, and then if any command fails along the way, then go to that failure condition, and I hope that makes sense. Yeah,
I don't think this is working.
I think it is. It's mostly for the recording.
Yeah. Just a pro tip, if you're doing the command file updates, don't use CodeRunner. It doesn't,
Yeah.
it doesn't take...
CodeRunner
yeah.
is not made to interact with like GUI applications very well.
Yeah.
That's a great point.
It works for testing just a basic dialog window, but it won't update
It's
the
a
command file in real
constant in
time.
the swiftDialog channel of this thing doesn't work, what am I doing wrong, whatever, and it turns out they're running it in CodeRunner. So I generally just test using terminal instead. Okay, so this is what a dialog list view looks like. This is the same example I showed earlier. And the way you define what items show up on that list is by telling swiftDialog I have a list item, and this is the display name I want for that list item. And if you want it to look nicer than just having a display name, you want to add an icon with a certain color, you want to add a subtitle with additional text, whatever. You do that this way. This, again, gets fairly complex quick when you're dealing with lists. And you may want to use a JSON file as well, or instead. One other thing about the JSON files is you can mix and match. So you could have all your list items in the JSON file, and then at the command line as an argument, you could pass your title and message and icon and stuff like that. So the same principle applies here. We want to update swiftDialog, but now instead of just telling it, there's not just one main progress bar. Each individual item has a status, a text status, and a progress bar that we can update. So we just format our dialog command slightly differently. We have to tell it the title of the item that we want to update. You can also define that as the index value on the list if you don't want to use the title. But you tell it what item you want to update and then how you want to update it, which is that right there. And then in this case, I'm updating the status text to say that it's scanning. I don't know what it's scanning. I don't know how it's scanning, but it's scanning. Here I've set a variable to progress equals 40. And then I told swiftDialog to update this item to progress of 40. If you have a command that outputs a nice percentage to a log file somewhere, you can do tricks to make swiftDialog show the actual progress of a process that's running on your machine. Not going over that here. So next I've set a status value to success and then told swiftDialog set it to success, and you'll see I've got that nice looking green check mark. Users know, hey, that step went awesome. And that's how you update a list. So we had our Q&A a little bit earlier. Are there any extra questions about this before we go on?
So my question is, rather than me going and just, because I've never used swiftDialog or Installomator, I'm tasked with getting all this stuff set up from scratch. So I got a lot ahead of me. Yeah,
That's awesome. You get to make a lot of decisions though
yeah,
too.
it's great.
You make your own mistakes and problems
I'm looking
that you'll
forward to
solve later.
I think I would be benefited personally from having a lot of this stuff set up already. I could see just what you've presented already being like, yeah, I want that exactly in my environment. Do these exist as templates anywhere rather than me just building it all out from scratch?
So absolutely. So in the so first of all, in the swiftDialog wiki, right? You go to GitHub, you go to the wiki tab, you'll see a table of contents on the right. Bart has gathered links to a whole bunch of different projects that you can go and steal code from, look at for inspiration, whatever. There's a bunch right there. Everything you see in this talk is in my personal GitHub repository I made for this, which I'll have links at the end here. So there's some fully functional code. I mean, it's not intended for production ready, but it is definitely something you can start off with. And we'll have more examples at the end of this too, and I'm happy to talk to you afterwards to show you some stuff.
Awesome,
Second Son, my company has a repository on our GitHub with a bunch of example scripts, a swiftDialog example repo. And those are, again, not intended for just push this right into production, but those examples show like how to capture the results of a button output, or a checkbox and stuff like that, right? So like how to tell what a user chose and all those features, like just as a technology display more than production ready stuff.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, okay. Let's get to the good stuff. Mashing them together. So I named this talk, You Got Your Installomator in My swiftDialog on a whim because they suggested funny things, and I figured I have to put some kind of Reese's peanut butter reference here, so ChatGPT helped me generate this, right? Or Copilot helped me generate this, right? I needed one Reese's reference. No, I don't know. Did he ever do any advertising? Yeah. Offer me solutions, not problems, please. Okay. So there are basically 4 steps to smashing these 2 tools together for any single install. Here we're going to install low profile using Installomator. So I'm opening up my dialog window just like we did before. I'm using my custom command file so I know where to send those instructions. And I put an ampersand on the end of it to send that dialog window to the background so my script will continue from there. So step 2, run the Installomator label. So to do that, I'm giving the path to the Installomator script. I'm telling it what application I want to install. And I'm passing one additional argument this time. I'm telling Installomator, here's where my dialog command file is. Tell Dialog what to do. And then this isn't even really a step. You just watch it happen. Installomator knows how to send instructions to that command file. It gives you real-time actual progress on the download and on the install steps, tells your user what's going on as it goes, and tells them that it's finishing. Step 4 is to quit the dialog window. Installomator won't do that for you, which is good because you don't always want it to quit the dialog window. That's really it. Once you understand those fundamentals from the first 2 parts of the talk, pushing them together to make a simple self-service workflow only takes those 4 steps. And again, this is available. This is not necessarily intended for you to just go rush and push it to 10,000 computers from Jamf. But this is an example of a self-service script that you can run in probably any MDM tool. It is, oh, that's funny. I changed it to bash because I know not everything runs Z shell, but my screenshot or my thing still says Z shell, whatever. So 4 steps. I'm setting up all my command file stuff. I'm opening my dialog window. I'm running my Installomator command, and then I'm quitting that dialog window. Sorry, the Installomator command, just to specify one more time, the path to the script, the label, which is the label of the application you want to install, and then the command file where your dialog window is waiting for instructions. And once that Installomator process completes, you can quit the dialog window. Again, not necessarily production ready. You would want logic in here to do one thing or the other if Installomator passed or failed, right? This is just a simple example, a starting point for you to start building bigger things that are appropriate for your environment. You get this bonus from Installomator if you have swiftDialog installed. It will give your user a notification center event telling them all the details of what just happened. If you don't have swiftDialog installed, Installomator will use the AppleScript version for that, but you get the little scripty thing in the icon instead of your custom thing. This is an optional feature with Installomator. You don't have to have it notify your users. If you use Notify Silent, then they won't get any notifications at all. If you notify all, they'll get a notification for every single step. I'm not sure why you would want to do that, but it exists. Might be good for testing, but I don't know. Or the default is to notify upon success. And I tested last night because I wasn't sure. I do believe it is only upon success. If a failure happens, it doesn't notify your user of that. So again, something you'll want to add to the building blocks of your script there. That was very easy, and we can do more. So there's 17 minutes left. We already did some of the Q&A stuff through the talk, so I'm going to keep on going and show you one more example script that is available in the repository, and it's a script to deploy multiple apps all at once using swiftDialog and Installomator. Once again, not intended for immediate production use, but if you want to make your own list install solution for deployment or updates, this is a great starting point for you. the way I write shell scripts, I like keeping all of my options for big commands just in an array. So this is similar to a variable, but it's an array. It has multiple entries. These are the options I'm going to be passing to the dialog command. You'll notice the contents of the title are in quotation marks, which tells the shell this is the first element, and then this whole thing is the second element, even though there are spaces there. Don't split it up. And this is one more array. We're going to go through several arrays right now through this. So another array. These are the applications I actually want to install. And you'll notice the entire line is within quotes here. I want this entire line to be one array element. And that's because I want the label, the display name, and the icon I want it to use. I need to keep them related somehow, all together. And this is the trick that I stole from Adam Codiga, actually, who probably stole it from somebody else first. But I keep the array in one line. I keep all of the information on one line of the array, and then we use the cut command again. This time I'm just cutting on commas to say this is section 1, section 2, and section 3. So basically, picture it like a spreadsheet, comma-separated values. My first column is the label, second is the display name, third is the path to the icon I want to use. Another array to include the Installomator options I want to pass for each and every one, each and every run of Installomator as we go through this. And notification options, because once my list is done, I'm going to send a notification center event with this content using swiftDialog again. Here I am, so that was the whole customization section. Here I have a section I'm just defining the path to my tools so that I don't have to do that later one by one. I have a command file trick here, and I'm adding the command file option. I'm appending this to my array of dialog options after I've generated the temporary file. And this is where the meat starts happening. So the first thing I need to do, I have that array of all the items I want to process. I need to draw my dialog window, and I need to tell swiftDialog everything I'm going to process before I start processing them one by one, right? So I have the complete list first. This is, I'm not going over this in detail. Again, the code's available, and there's some comments each step of the way, and I'm happy to talk about any individual one in the hallway or on Slack or whatever. But essentially what this is doing is giving me an array that ends up just having the phrase list item, display name, list item, display name, list item, display name. So when I call my dialog command, I'm also telling it all of the names of the items I want to include. And this is me actually calling that dialog window. This is why I like using arrays. This is a super long, complex command that's actually boiled down to these things. The path to the dialog binary, the options I want to use, and all of the list options that I've generated based off of that array of apps. And then I'm sleeping 1 second because I need a break sometimes. swiftDialog needs a break. At this point in the script, we have a swiftDialog window presented with each individual application we're installing. And now I'm going to use the swiftDialog command file to tell it the wait command, which will start, progress bar circle, and then iterate through that app list and one by one, run Installomator with the label from that line with the options that I configured, and telling Installomator how to update my list using what command file. Like which item is it updating as it runs the thing. So that's, at that point, going to go through that app list one by one, complete the Installomator run for each of those options, and we're done. I'm going to notify my user using the message I set up above. I'm going to quit my dialog window, and you don't really have to, but I delete the command file as well after the run. And so this is a real-life example running that sample script and how it looks with Installomator updating individual line items as it goes. I'm not going to make you watch this entire thing, but It is pretty cool. All right. That's pretty much it. I do want to mention one more time, Baseline is our tool from Second Sun Consulting, open source, free. If you're looking for you specifically, you might want to check this out. It's a way of tying together not just Installomator and swiftDialog, but also running other scripts and packages you might want to run. We've done a ton of the work for you. You basically run the package. It runs a baseline script, and baseline takes instructions from a configuration file. It can be an MDM configuration profile or a plist on disk. But instead of building that individual script like I just did, like I just exampled, you can tell in a configuration file, hey, I want you to run these Installomator labels. I need you to run this script, and I want you to restart afterwards. So it's a way of utilizing these tools in a zero-touch or light-touch workstation setup situation. And there is a specific channel for that on Slack as well. You can come ask questions. The GitHub repositories are in what I think is the obvious place. I didn't have a QR code for this one because you can Google it. Tools are popular. The top results will be good. This is some more information that will be on the slide deck that the Mac Admins Conference provides to you, right? I already got to mention the swiftDialog examples repository that's on the Second Sun Consulting GitHub. I also have a Mac OS stuff repository on my personal GitHub. This is kind of silly stuff or things I make for my own convenience as a Mac admin. If I think they're cool, I'll put them in there and try to make a blog post about it. There are a ton of other community tools. There's more. I'm not trying to play favorites, but these are awesome tools that use swiftDialog. App Auto Patch and Patchomator both also use Installomator. They have kind of the same purpose, which is do the logic for you to run Installomator when it finds an app exists on the device. So you don't know if Zoom's on there. App Auto Patch will look and say, oh, Zoom's here. I'm going to run Installomator to update it anyways. This QR code will take you to my repository for all of the stuff in this talk today. So all of that example code, maybe even screenshots, I'm not sure, but all of that example code, the JSON files, all of that are available here, including this Keynote file and the PDF export of this Keynote file. And last, they want me to put this here so you can give feedback on my talk and let them know how I did and let me know. I'm really curious. This is actually my first conference presentation ever. It's my first professional conference, so let me know what I can do better. Thank you. Are there other questions?
Less question and more comment. Bart was at Mac DevOps YVR 3 weeks ago and gave a great workshop. That video is out on the YouTube if you want to look at it. It goes very deep.
Yeah. John Crane gave a fantastic talk about swiftDialog last year at this conference, and his is up on YouTube. It's excellent. So again, I think John Crane is also on the swiftDialog examples page. If you go to the swiftDialog wiki and look at I think they call it the showcase, is where a whole bunch of community projects that use this tool are posted. Any other questions? Okay. Yeah, Ross?
Yeah. And then
Good call on when all of these things ran, you're always using the quit command, right? So make sure that thing stops so your MDM can keep processing, doing other stuff. Is there a way to keep that window open in case of error, but still have the process get orphaned?
Yeah.
Right, so you can just
When you use the ampersand,
yeah.
I've found that your management tool will quit successfully. It kind of abandons that child process. It does add a line to the output. When the script completes, it'll give you a little line in terminal that says this process number is still running, but it does exit the script successfully. The quit command here is really just to close the window. Don't think it's necessary to do that to free up your management tool. Where you need to worry about freeing up the management tool is when you're waiting for users to interact with that window in order to process, additional tasks based on their input.
Sweet, thank you.
Okay.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment.
This is Adam Kodiga. He's another of the Installomator
Don't mind me.
contributors.
One thing that we often say about
Maintainers.
swiftDialog is that it's a dumb app, which it's a great and amazing app.
Right.
But really, everything that it does comes from your script. So for example, error handling, if you wanted to do an installation and you had to download the installer during the process, all of that error handling is going to be on you, but you're able to do that error handling if you discover an error, change the dialog box, stuff like that.
Right.
And I'm going to spoil a surprise too. How many people use Jamf? If you download Installomator from GitHub, the code has a debug mode turned on,
right.
so that if you just blindly download it and put it into your Jamf and don't read the instructions, it won't actually do anything when it runs. So read the instructions and change that debug mode.
Great point. So when you're on the main branch of the Installomator repo, that script has debug enabled by default. You need to change it in the script. If you're using the package release, that package has debug 0 in the script, which means it's not running in debug, it's running in real mode.
So just a quick question. I learned the hard way with Chocolatey when I was deploying applications in mass that they don't like thousands of endpoints hitting their servers at one time. Does Installomator run into those same problems?
If you're running it on thousands of endpoints from any one single IP address, then yeah, you'll probably run into those same
Will they block
types of
my
problems.
IP if I do that?
You'll have to
Chocolatey
ask
would.
them, friends.
Okay.
So
Okay.
It reaches out to individual vendors.
Okay.
it reaches out to individual vendors. However, low profile and Mist and a whole bunch of other stuff uses GitHub, right? Installomator actually has, I didn't go into it, but it has a really easy, nifty way of building labels for GitHub projects. Makes it just dead simple to add GitHub things. So GitHub does rate limiting for sure. Again, you might need to use your management tool to space that out or talk to your network team.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great presentation.
Thanks, man.
Number one. I don't know if you touched on it. Can Installomator handle variables, right? So many people here are probably going to install one version for their entire school or business, but you know who I am, and I have multiple clients. Jump Cloud requires a reg code. DNS requires a reg code. Can I build one Installomator for all of my clients with variables, or do I have to build individual packages for each one?
So the assemble script that's on GitHub so if you look at the GitHub repository for Installomator, like Installomator is a 7,000 some line script once it's all built by default, right? But if you look at that's really hard to work on if you're working on certain components, like I need to update just the download engine function, whatever. So Armin and Soren have split the script up into digestible chunks in the repo for their own purposes, but you could also use that as well, right? So the assemble script will, when you run it, looks at whatever's on your computer, whatever changes you've made, whatever labels you put in the label folder, etc., and will stitch it all together in one place. So you could long story short, like, yeah, it wouldn't be too much work to do what you're asking right there. You would either use a management script to like change those variables and pump out multiple Installomator scripts, one for each of your clients, or I'm not sure what you said, the details, if there's a different URLs for each individual client or something, is that what you're saying?
It's the same installer, it's the same thing, right? But the reg code to get them to log into the right system.
Yeah. So there's all kinds of ways you can handle that with a management script that would either build the installer differently, or you pass the download URL at runtime to override what's in the label. And that might be the smarter way. I'd need to know the details.
Also check really smart vendors, which all vendors are smart, simply will want you to have that reg code in place somewhere on the Mac and then just run the installer plain without doing anything,
Right.
not having to pass the variables to the installer. If that's the case, then just put that reg code in place before you run Installomator.
Yeah, yeah. We got 10 seconds. I will answer any more questions. I'm gonna stick around. I have 5 little goodies left. If anyone wants a Big Mac keychain with a little secret compartment, come on up and grab it. But thank you again for coming. I can't believe there are so many of you. Oh, that's crazy.